who have come here to Cape Town to minister to the interfaith community, and William has very graciously agreed to be our guest speaker this morning, so we look forward to hearing from
right towards the end of the Bhagavad Gita, where Lord Krishna gives his final secret to the human soul. And basically what he says is, you are my beloved. And because you are my beloved, I share this most secret teaching with you. And what is the teaching? The teaching is, make me your beloved. Complete that circle of love. And in that completion, you shall come to me, you shall be one with me. And then he gives the path, which is to surrender utterly and completely to the divine. Mam ekam sharanam vraja, take refuge in me alone. Abandon all other supports and practices. Take that supreme leap of faith. So I open with that because it really is the ancient song of the Lord that we also find in the other spiritual traditions. And as Thomas Keating says so beautifully in the Christian tradition, the entire purpose of Christianity is transformation into Christ, nothing else. That's a statement that he makes in the video called The Future of Christianity. Some of you may have seen that. And one could say the same applies to the other traditions. The entire purpose of Buddhism is transformation into Buddha. The entire purpose of Vaishnava Hinduism is transformation into Krishna. The entire purpose of Sufism is transformation into the beloved. This is the call of the divine to the human soul, which is to give ourselves utterly and completely to this profound transformation, this most magnificent gift, which is the highest purpose of life. And in that we become one with God. And as Thomas Keating says, we are called to be God. A 1,000 years from now, when humanity looks back on this period of history, I have a sense that one of the most important developments will be the beginning of the healing across the different spiritual traditions that began in this period. And the 100 years or so, from about 1950 to 2050, will be seen as an absolute pivotal period in which the major healing and reconciliation of the different spiritual traditions of the world began in earnest. And they will note that it could not have begun earlier than about 1950 because we needed the advent of the transport and communication systems, the airplane and the internet in particular, for this major transformation to happen. And it could not have waited any longer than now, because the world was about to tear itself apart because of the conflicts between these traditions. So some of the most important pioneering work happening on the planet now is this bridging work across the spiritual traditions. And as most of you, or all of you know, Thomas Keating is one of the pioneers in this work. And 30 years ago, he started something called the Snowmass Conference, in which he brought religious leaders together, seasoned, mature practitioners from 9 different major world religions, covering all of the Western and Eastern traditions. And they met in Snowmass, Colorado. How many of you are familiar with this story and are aware of this? It's a very profound story. They met in Snowmass, Colorado at the monastery for 1 or 2 weeks a year, every year. And the reason he pulled this together is that at that point, Thomas had been to many inter-spiritual, interfaith conferences, and he said, you know, frankly, they were boring. And all that would happen was you'd go there and people would get up and they would espouse how great their tradition is, And he said, I found that the only thing that was interesting about these conferences was the conversations that you had during the meals and the breaks. That's where it was good. The rest was boring. So he said, I'm going to convene a conference where we're only going to have meals and breaks and no presentations. And so that's what he did. And that's what the Snowmass conference was. It was a conference where they came together to do two things. One was to sit in practice together. Now, what is the universal practice? What is the practice that's common to every tradition? Silence. Silent prayer, centering prayer, contemplative prayer, meditation. That practice of coming into the infinite silence is common to every tradition. So that practice they could all do together, even while they're doing different practices. Some of them might be repeating some silent mantra, and others would be in silent prayer. And the Buddhists might be doing their non-distracted, non-meditation, as the Dzogchen masters call it. But whatever it is, whether it's Shikantaza or centering prayer, or Krishnamurti's choiceless awareness, it's all done in silence. So in silence they could meet in the unifying infinite space. And the other thing they did was they told their stories. They told their personal spiritual journeys and how their own spiritual practice had transformed their consciousness. And what they found was that although they came from all these different diverse traditions, over time they found 8 points of common agreement. And those 8 points of common agreement were essentially an assertion of a kind of universal spirituality. The first one was the affirmation of the existence of an ultimate reality, which goes by many different names: God, Brahman, the Tao, Krishna, depending on the tradition, Allah. So there is this affirmation, there is this ultimate reality. And the rest of those 8 points basically articulate the fact that the human being is ultimately one with that reality, and the highest purpose of life is to realize that oneness. And that living without that realization, we live in ignorance and weakness and suffering. And in that union with that ultimate reality, we become freed from that suffering, and we live in a kind of creative, dynamic union with that ultimate reality. So they came from all these different traditions. They realized this central unity of the different spiritual and religious traditions of the world. And that was quite an achievement, and they were very pleased to have gotten that. And then what they did was very carefully and cautiously, they began to go into the differences. And they began to explore their differences, where they believed completely different things. And to their immense delight, they discovered that they became more bonded over their differences than they had over their points of common agreement. And that's a really profound achievement in a certain way. So this group of religious leaders from all these different traditions, they came together, they first discovered their points of common agreement, they then went into their differences, and they found that they bonded even more over their differences than over their points of common agreement. That, to me, is a profound inspiration. And this group of religious leaders, convened by Father Thomas, basically achieved in a microcosm what now the entire human family needs to achieve. And that is our call. And 1,000 years from now, it will have been achieved, in probably long before 1,000 years from now. But this will be the pivotal moment when that work began. And people will look back to this time, my conviction, and will look at people like Thomas Keating and others who have been spearheading this work as really the great pioneers who launched this profound transformation of human spirituality and brought the traditions together, not fusing them together into one single tradition, but putting them together in proper relationship to one another, seeing each one as a part of the spectrum of the family of spiritual traditions, all of which have at their core this transformation of consciousness from a separate self to oneness with the supreme reality.